All right, we are back. What is going on, Colts Nation? Welcome back to another episode of Bring the Juice. Your guys, Cody and Derek, back for another one, guys. Before we get going, shout out to Derek. What a great T-shirt. What a great way to hopefully inspire. If Michael Pittman were to catch this specific podcast, we need you back, brother. AR needs you back. But anyway, Derek, great shirt. But let's continue on. And I think that actually is a perfect segue in a lot of ways to talking about the topic of this video, man. Because, I mean, if anybody, you've seen the title of this video, you know what we're going to be talking about. And the fact is that the future is extremely bright for the Indianapolis Colts. It really, really is. There's a ton we're going to get into why the future is very bright for the Colts. But, Derek, I mean, I think we have to start before we talk about what the outlook of the team is this year. I think we have to also look back about a year ago from now to the state of the franchise and where it was in 2022, right? And just how far this team has come from where they were to where they are now. Talk to me about that, man, and just the state of where the Colts were in 2022 versus, what they've had to come through and where they sit right now.
Yeah, from 2022 to 2023 is a massive change in how things went because it's not just from a personnel standpoint. It was from a cultural standpoint that this team has changed so much within the year. Remember, Cody, we were talking about how, this team looked so bad, but we were talking about how after each loss, what did we hear from Frank Reich every single time, right? We got outplayed. This one's on me. I need to be better. Or, just some other same thing we heard every single. Yeah.
Something we hear but nothing ever got better.
Yeah.
Every week.
It's just some way to say an excuse of why this team was not living up to the standard that was placed upon them at the beginning of the year. And the amount of times we had to keep saying, why do you keep saying this? Like, why aren't you doing something about it? Instead of saying it, do something about it, but it never got changed. And then, listen, very rarely do NFL coaches get fired midway through a season. Okay. It doesn't happen very often. Okay. It happens very rarely, maybe once a season at most. So when it comes to that, I mean, and especially given the Indianapolis way, we usually give people the benefit of the doubt. So to have that situation happen where in the middle of a season, you end up firing a coach that you had there for 5 years, and then on top of it all, to replace him with a guy who has never been a head coach before in the history of his life, even though he's been one of the greatest NFL players that has ever played the game of football for his respective position, still to have that sort of situation, you had yourself you were at what felt like a bottomless pit, and it only felt like you were going deeper and deeper. And it was only at that point, Cody, where we were just hoping that the losses would just happen quicker, so then that way we could just move on to a new season to try and, salvage what we could. And from the moment that Shane Steichen stepped in and became the head coach of this team, the accountability factor has been there. This team took a step forward. Obviously, this team has a long ways to go still, but you like the direction that you're headed for Indianapolis based off of what you saw in 2022 with no production and a lack of culture to 2023 with good production with half your roster injured and a great culture. And that's ultimately one of the reasons why you won so many games. So you look at it and you say, we get some of our guys back. We add some more pieces to this mix. This is going to be a fun team to look out for the future.
I tell you, man, 2022 just feels like a blur. Like it just doesn't feel like it was only like a year and so many months ago. Like it really doesn't because it was just such a disaster. It felt like it was a you know garbage fire, right? It was just absolute terrible. And then it turned out like the fire from the garbage can went into the house, and then it became a house fire, and it became 1,000 times worse, and it was just an absolute disaster. And you're like, oh man, what's going to happen with this team? I mean, gosh, it was just something where Derek, I've never in my life looked forward to a season being done more than I did in 2022. And I'm not a person that roots for losses, but that might have been one of the first times where I was like, just lose out. Like, just make sure we get, and secure a really favorable position in the draft. That's kind of the point I was, especially, kind of after the whole firing. And then, they won the one game against the Raiders. And then basically from there, didn't do anything well at all. In fact, embarrassed themselves on multiple occasions. It's just crazy to look back at that. But you're right. I mean, this team has, with Shane Steichen, that was the first piece for the Colts. They spent a ton of time with so many candidates. If you remember, Derek, this thing last year went into after the Super Bowl. Like when pretty much every team that was looking for a new head coach had found their head coach at that point. The Indianapolis Colts were like one of maybe one or two teams. I know the Cardinals got Jonathan Gannon, so maybe they were the other one that were waited and got their head coach and took their time and talked to so many candidates over in so many broad different type of guys, and had all these hours and hours that they poured into all these different candidates until they finally landed on Shane Steichen. I think that's the first piece you talk about, with just the differences from Shane Steichen, that the things that he's held to and the things that he held others to compared to what it was or was not under Frank Reich. The accountability is a word. I think it's a great word that you used. That is one thing that I think Shane Steichen has done such a great job in year number one. I would honestly say, Derek, that's probably the thing that's been the best part about Shane Steichen. He's had a lot of good things that you really like about him, but I've loved the accountability piece. And I think it was so crucial for a roster that just didn't have it, and a team that just didn't have that accountability. And we heard, Derek, all these leaks from, the different people who were kind of inside that organization or had sources inside that organization about, guys missing meetings. Obviously, a guy like Isaiah Rodgers betting, all this stuff for the culture that just wasn't good at all. And it was very clear and apparent that Frank Reich and this coaching staff, they'd lost the locker room. Like they had lost the locker room at a certain point, and I think we really started to see that at the end of 2021, with that, epic collapse at the end of the season. And then it just really we thought, okay, that was bad. And it just became worse in 2022. It was just bad all around for this team. And so Shane Steichen comes in. That's the first big piece of the puzzle. You get your head coach, a guy who was just in the Super Bowl and, really led the Eagles to, almost the promised land. Like it was that close. Like they were in that game. The offense was humming. So Shane Steichen was probably the hottest candidate out there just because of his body of work, his history with the different types of quarterbacks. So you bring him in, he sets a new culture, and also I think the other piece of this, Derek, that you didn't have, in years previous is the quarterback. And that was the big thing, the big question mark. Pick number 4. Which quarterback is the Colts going to take? Because there was 3, arguably 4 guys the Colts could take, right? And obviously the Colts landed on Anthony Richardson with that 4th overall pick. And, while, the sample size, Derek, wasn't huge for Anthony Richardson, that's probably the biggest, most disappointing thing out of all this. You didn't get to see AR a whole lot. But the things and the glimpses that you saw, Derek, I mean, he made a strong impression early. I mean, the fact that he didn't even play, he played like a quarter of the season, and he played well enough for you. And you and I can honestly say he looks like he could be the quarterback of the future. I think that tells a lot of the story about Anthony Richardson right there and how dynamic he is when he is on the field. And, you just didn't have that, really since Andrew Luck hung it up at the start of 2019. You haven't had a quarterback like this that you are long-term committed to and you believe can be the guy, not just for 1 or 2 years, but for 5, 10, 15 plus years. right? You think he can be a guy that can lead you potentially to the promised land if he can stay healthy. And that was one thing, Derek, the Colts under Chris Ballard and Frank Reich, outside of 2018, they didn't have that stability at quarterback. They didn't know necessarily who was going to be their quarterback. And this is the first year, Derek, I honestly think this is the first year where we can say we know who the Colts starting quarterback is going to be outside of 2018, of course. I mean, I really think that's it because 2017, Andrew Luck was out the entire season. 2018, he was back. 2019, he retired. And you had Jacoby Brissett, Brian Hoyer, and that whole mess. You had, obviously Phillip Rivers in 2020 for 1 year. You had Carson Wentz for 1 year. You had Matt Ryan. And then now you have Anthony Richardson. So it's just something you haven't had, and you finally have it, which I don't know about you, Derek, but that makes me sleep a lot better at night now that you feel like you have something to build off of from a quarterback standpoint.
Does the shirt does it justice, right? I mean,
Yeah,
I wouldn't be wearing these guys on my body if I didn't think that these two were the answer to what we have going on here. Okay. This guy right here is about to be the next great thing for the Indianapolis Colts. And this guy is going to be right there alongside with him. All right. So you're right. It's one of those situations where a lot of Colts fans, for what feels like the first time since that ungodly day, that we feel pretty confident in the direction that this team is headed in. At least not even just from the sense that we don't know 100% how the quarterback situation is going to go, but I mean, still to have the right coach, to have the right system, to have a quarterback that can run that system, right? Like it's that sort of situation where you feel a lot more confident in your ability to be able to make things work next season and further seasons beyond. So it's really awesome that the Indianapolis Colts are going to have a bunch of those guys. And, I mean, I just take away from it that there's more to it than that. I mean, Anthony Richardson's only one piece of the puzzle, right? There's a lot of other great pieces that Indianapolis has, right? I mean, we talk about Jonathan Taylor. We talk about the offensive line the way it is right now. You talk about some of the weapons on both sides of the ball that are stepping up and being very productive players in this league. Zaire Franklin, Michael Pittman, God hope that he makes it back to Indianapolis, and Juju Brents, who we have all the hype in the world for to be the next great cornerback for Indianapolis. I mean, I don't even know if I can really say next great because we haven't really ever had a great corner, if that tells you anything. So, I mean, there's a lot of great pieces, I feel, that Indianapolis has that can help really elevate them, and it helped keep them afloat this year. Michael Pittman kept this pass game afloat practically by himself. Jonathan Taylor, he was the main reason why you were even in that Texans game to begin with. Juju Brents, lockdown on Devontae Adams in clutch situations, one of the best wide receivers in the game, right? So, I mean, there's just a lot of great things to look at for Indy from a personnel perspective that you can hold your hat to and say that we have something building here. We just have to try and build it a little faster.
Yeah, and that was the thing, Derek, with this roster last year. People said, "Oh, this roster was terrible. Chris Ballard doesn't know how to build a roster." All these things, and it's kind of interesting because you did add. Obviously, you added the quarterback. You added a couple guys in free agency. You added some guys in the draft. But Derek, when you look at it, still the core of this roster that Chris Ballard has built is still here, right? You mentioned Jonathan Taylor, Michael Pittman. Offensive line, Bernard Ryman taking that step to left tackle. Some of the linebackers, back again. Some of the defensive linemen, although you did add, obviously Samson Ebukam, who led you in sacks. And so you still had a lot of the core guys here, even though you added some pieces that helped you, which I think is good because you have a good core roster. And this is something that we've talked about, Derek, when we're talking about how to attack the offseason and free agency and the draft. You're like, you have a lot of good players. You have a lot of foundational players on your roster. You just need to add a couple more playmakers on both sides of the ball. Obviously some more weapons for Anthony Richardson, and then, some more players to help you, stopping some of those big chunk plays that you allowed, because your defense, especially your secondary, was so young and inexperienced and dealt with so many injuries and all that stuff. But you look at that and you say, okay, the core roster's still here. There's a lot of guys that are, still very young, like Michael Pittman's going to turn 26. Jonathan Taylor's in his mid 20s. Like some of your good big guys that you're paying or going to have to pay, are still fairly young, that have, really were big contributors. And, you look at that list that we did, Derek, the previous video, talking about some of the key, most important, or I guess the best players, if you will, for the Colts in, 2023. And you look at how many of those guys are still in their 20s. And that is really exciting. And obviously there's a few guys that are a little bit older, but you still have a pretty good young core altogether. And here's the great thing, Derek, about that is, you're only in year number 2 of Anthony Richardson's rookie contract. You had a lot of injuries and still nearly made the playoffs and won the division. You were a drop pass away, or if you want to say a bad drop pass, whatever you want to say, whoever you want to put the blame on, regardless, you're one failed conversion away from potentially, being in the playoffs. And we have a whole different conversation about that. So you still won 9 games, despite the fact that Jonathan Taylor had to miss multiple weeks twice. You didn't have Anthony Richardson for a long time. You had different players in and out of the lineup, like Juju Brents, but you still were able to weather the storm in certain ways and pull out victories whenever you had to do it. Now, again, some of the quarterbacks you played, not necessarily the greatest quarterbacks at the time, but you still, again, a win's a win, and a win is hard to get in the NFL. I don't care who you are. I don't care if you're facing the best team or the worst team in the NFL. They can beat you on any given Sunday if given the opportunity. So you weathered the storm with injuries. You're like, we got the Taylor situation figured out with the contract. He's going to have the whole off season, and you potentially getting Michael Pittman back, which would be great. Anthony Richardson back as well. And here's the thing, Derek, you're in year 2 of Anthony Richardson's contract. You have, I think, the 4th or 5th most cap space in the NFL. I know you're going to have to re-sign some of your own guys, but you still have that, flexibility, if you will, to go out and get a couple, kind of bigger names or some guys that can really contribute to your team immediately. And then you still do have a pretty good draft pick. So, I mean, this team, it's still like young, but it's still getting started, you feel like, in a lot of ways. And, drafting that rookie quarterback, it kind of resets the timer a little bit in certain ways and allows you to kind of restart in certain ways as well. So I think you look at that, you say there's a good core roster here. You figured out quarterback, you figured out left tackle, you figured out your head coach, and you have a lot of flexibility this offseason and getting some guys back from injuries where you're like, the future is very bright for Indianapolis. If all goes well and guys can stay healthy, you add a couple impact players. Derek, I have no doubt this can be a double-digit win football team next year. Can be a legitimate threat to the AFC South. And if Anthony Richardson's healthy and developing like we saw him already in the short time, who knows how far they can make it in the playoffs. I'm not going to crown this team a Super Bowl contender. I'm not going to do that because, again, the AFC still runs through Kansas City, and it will continue to run through Kansas City. What I'm saying is the future for the Colts is bright because they are extremely young. They have a lot of talent, and they're going to continue to add talent to their roster as well. So, Derek, any other thoughts here about the Colts and their future and just anything that I said that you want to maybe talk about before we wrap this one up?
Yeah, I mean, this is the time, we've been saying it over and over again, that if Indianapolis wants to make a big splash and remind people that they are still relevant in the NFL today, this is the time to do it now because you have that flexibility. As we mentioned in a lot of other videos, that this is a perfect time with this quarterback under rookie contract. You have some of these centerpieces locked down. Go and get the big ones that are necessary to take this team over the edge, because right now may be the last time that you get a chance to actually do it. So go take that opportunity, Ballard. Please make it happen.
Yep, and we'll see what the Colts elect to do, who they bring back, some key free agents, which we've already talked about. I'm sure we'll talk about here soon. As free agency, Derek, it's getting closer with every passing day, so really excited for that. But guys, let us know your thoughts on the Indianapolis Colts. Do you believe, like we do, that their future is bright moving forward? If you guys are new to the channel, thank you so much for checking us out. If you wouldn't mind, be sure to smash that like button. And if you think we deserve it, hit that subscribe button as well. Guys, we are getting ever closer. It feels like we've been inching towards that 18K mark, Derek. Last I checked, we were at 19. I think it was 25. So, we still have a little bit to go here. But, if you guys could help us out, we would greatly appreciate that. But other than that, guys, that'll do it for this one. Thank you so much for tuning in. And as always, guys, go Colts.